Hello students, I am Dr. Ilke Das, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS at UK. Welcome back to another lecture of this NPTEL course, Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In the previous class, we saw the everydayness of power, the everydayness through which classes reproduce themselves. And that is where I am bringing you to another concept as well as another conceptual framework by a very famous Italian researcher, a politician, an activist, as well as one of the most dominant authorities who never hold a position of power in terms of academia, but is now ruling over the entire gamut of academia because of his depth of knowledge, because of his depth of understanding society. And that person is none other than Antonio Gramsci. Now, Antonio Gramsci was a person who started off with a very basic idea, an idea that why people usually do not revolt against the powerful, why people consent to the way they are treated. That was Gramsci's central question and also a very powerful question. So, as I said, Gramsci was an activist, Gramsci was a politician, and he was one of the founding members of Italian Communist Party, because of which the government of the Benito Mussolini, the fascist government of Italy, imprisoned him for 2 decades. And the beauty of Antonio Gramsci was that he lived in the prison for almost 10 years, and that was the best part of his academic life. Now, when I say academic life, that means he was academically very productive. And when I say academically very productive, that basically means that through what we call now as prison notebooks, he brought all the knowledge, all the experiences as an activist, as a learned person, as an intellectual, to the creation of a theory called hegemony. Primarily because when you are living inside a prison cell, you have nothing else to do but to reflect. Either you go mad or you become an intellectual. Imagine the same thing happening with even the nationalist freedom fighters of India, whether it was Jawaharlal Nehru or it was other people. Most of the books that they wrote in the prison. The same thing happened with Antonio Gramsci also. But the way he theorized the conditions that were there, his theorization also came from his reading of Marxism, the literature that was available to him, the history of Italy, as well as the history of unification of Italy. And he raised this a very simple but profound question: why do ruling classes survive crisis? When we were discussing about Marx, we had discussed about the historical materialism. The historical materialism of arrow of time, in which the history moved from primitive communism to communism. In between we had slavery, we had feudalism, we had capitalism, and also socialism. And at every point we had a revolution. And according to the orthodox Marxists, this revolution happened because of the contradictions that were existent within those modes of production. Antonio Gramsci, when he was living inside Mussolini's prison, he begged to differ from this standpoint, because this was also the standpoint of the Second International of the Communist Party. And during this time, there was already a Soviet Union and Stalin had already come to power. And because Stalin had already come to power, so he had created a highly autocratic as well as a highly orthodox economist deterministic way of understanding Marx and his works. Benito Mussolini argues that we cannot understand revolution, we cannot understand the ruling classes, we cannot understand the survival of ruling classes, we cannot understand crisis unless and until we move out of economic determinism and go into politics, culture and sociology or society. So, for the orthodox Marxists, crisis means revolution. It is almost like automatic. There is production crisis, that means the more number of items or commodities are being produced in comparison to what is being sold in the market. So, a lot of workers are fired, and because they are fired, so according to orthodox Marxists, these laborers or these workers are going to fight against the capitalists and create a socialist state. So, anytime this happens, according to the orthodox Marxists, revolution is inevitable. Gramsci argues that this can never happen and this has never happened and this will never happen. Although he was a Marxist, but he was also a critical Marxist. Critical Marxist in the sense that he wanted to use the Marxist method of dialectics and the history in order to understand what is happening in a particular society. According to orthodox Marxists as well as Marx himself, socialism will come after capitalism, because socialism is the contradiction of capitalism. But what happened in Russia or Tsarist Russia? In Tsarist Russian regime, there was no capitalism as such, like we see in the USA, we see in England. It was basically a feudal society, and from feudal society, it directly transformed to a capitalist come socialist, or what is called as state capitalism. There was no private capital as such. This gave Gramsci an idea that it is not inevitable that the linear time of progress will always follow. Because it is not so, so we have to go beyond economics, we have to go beyond orthodoxy to understand the history of every place and how within that history politics and ideology are not false consciousness. Rather, ideology is the base on which struggles are going to happen, or ideology is the base on which struggles always happen, and politics and ideology, they always need to come together in order for the struggles to happen. In a moment we will come back to it and explain how he is letting us understand his idea of the beyond economism. And he gives the concept of hegemony in order to understand this entire framework. The framework of hegemony is between consent and coercion. Consent and coercion basically means that no power, whether it is state power, it is out of state power or extrajudicial power, ever runs or ever rules with coercion alone. The gun will take you to only one position or one station. It can never create a stable society. In other words, it can never create hegemony. Now, hegemony is always counterbalanced with domination. Domination is when there is more coercion, hegemony is when there is more consent. And in order for the creation of this consent, he gives another two categories or two institutions. One, political society, second, civil society. Political society is all about coercion, whereas civil society is all about consent. And as we have been discussing over the past 2-3 lectures, the significance of schools, media, religious institutions, legality, so on and so forth, for our understanding of everydayness of power, everydayness of political aspects. Here, politics is played around in everyday life. This is not about the state, this is not about a particular institution of a state, rather every day, how people live, why they consent, why they do not consent. But most often than not, why revolutions don't happen. So, in addition to hegemony, Gramsci also speaks about ruling class with a common sense. Now, this is very interesting, The reason this is very interesting is primarily because when we are talking about consent and coercion, so you might ask, but schools also are coercive. If you do not follow its rules and regulations, they also punish us. Same thing happens with churches. You have to follow the order of the church or any religious institution in order to justify something, because churches have moral power over your life. Schools give you education. This education makes you believe that you can achieve something in life, in this society or in some other society. Media portrays the truth. It tells you what is happening. Not so much for Gramsci or critical scholars. Why? Because they argue that the role of schools, role of media and role of churches is to create a common sense. A common sense that tells you that the ideas of the ruling class are the ideas that are natural. It is natural for a child to go to school once he or she attains 5 or 6 years of age. It is natural for that child to grow up to a healthy individual, from school go to college, after college get a job, after getting a job get married, after getting married reproduce or procreate, and after procreation take care of that child, and after taking care of their child do whatever you want to. So, this is the normalization of public life as well as personal life, and this is the most commonsensical aspect of doing it. Why we have law? We have law because law sees the truth. Why do we have a military? Military protects us. Why do we have police? Police takes care of law and order. So, each one of these aspects are normalized to make it a common sense. And according to Gramsci, the moment an idea becomes part of common sense, it immediately leads to hegemony, because then this common sense is not questioned. It is equals to your getting up in the morning and washing your face, that we had discussed with Bourdieu. It becomes internalized, embodied, and the moment this embodiment happens, politics becomes part of your everyday life without you and me even realizing about it. So, hegemony is a way to read between the lines what is happening here, which is invisible, which looks white. So, hegemony is again, it's not completely consent, it's not completely persuasion, it is somewhere in between. As I said, hegemony always moves between this consent and coercion. If it moves a little more towards consent, we have hegemony. The moment it leads more towards coercion, we have domination. But when we have more domination and more coercion, the society is more unstable. And this is where Gramsci agrees with the elite theorists of Moscow and other, because they also said that for a society to function adequately, properly, there has to be a consensus among the ruling elites. Otherwise, they will always be fighting against with each other, and the society would collapse. So, the second aspect is that this consensus is built on relationship. This is not possession. This is not like a pen that I am possessing. It is relational in nature. The relationship between the governing or the ruling elites and that of the subaltern masses. It is the consensus or relationship between what needs to be done and what ought not to be done. It is about morality, it is about culture, it is about how do you deal with certain situations in your day-to-day lives. So, civil society and political society, as we discussed, is leads to the formation of a state in which coercion and civil society coexist. So, on the one hand, you have a danda or police ka danda. On the other hand, you have awards and rewards. So, any situation that you see that is happening in the global south, in Africa, in US, anywhere, in our own very neighborhood, you will see every time there is more reliance of force, there is always a decline in consent. Whether it is the case of Sri Lanka, it is the case of Myanmar, it is the case of Bangladesh, it is the case of Nepal. Everywhere, look at their history, every time there is more of reliance on force, the background is decline of consent, or this consent is about what Weber talked about, legitimacy. And the legitimacy is again dependent on common sense. The common sense is that we have elected a government, and the role of this government is to protect us financially, protect us from external threats, protect us from climate change, and protect us by giving us a sense of belonging. When it does not happen, then hegemony gets fragmented and force becomes the way to rule. So, in order to manage this, Gramsci says that there is no elite or there is no ruling elite. Rather, he calls them the historic bloc or historical bloc. Historical bloc is a bloc which encompasses economy, politics, and culture. Anything else left out of it? I don't think so. So, the first thing that this historical bloc does when they are coming together is to transform the production or modes of production. Very typical the orthodox Marxist understanding. But at the same time, they also built alliances not with the groups who are in common understanding with them, rather to different groups. These different groups could be from left, these different groups could be your opponents, and these different groups could also be your own comrades. If it doesn't happen, then this historical bloc cannot work. And the third and most important is the creation of common sense. The common sense means that you also have to create a worldview in which you don't even have to justify something. It becomes part of your everyday naturalness. Like you get up in the morning and follow its suit. Think about for a moment why countries like Norway, why countries like Japan, and why some of these European countries have such wonderful on the time public transportation. Is it because the state or their governments love their population or their citizens, or is it because the moment they provide on the time or on time transportation, good house, good food, they are all going to contribute to the common sense that this is what it should be and this is the way we can be more productive. So the common sense then stabilizes domination, and when this domination gets stabilized, then there would not be any revolution. There could be a little bit of hiccups here and there, but those hiccups can be managed. And one of the critical stakeholders of this entire enterprise are intellectuals and the management of ideology. He gives another concept called the organic intellectuals. Organic intellectuals are the ones who come from this specific ideology and justify this ideology to the wider masses so that they can follow it, so that they can understand what is going on, and they believe what is being done is done for their own good. You take anybody nowadays on social media, you watch hundreds of podcasts coming up. I have lost count of the number of podcasts that are there on YouTube. And check out who are the interviewers and who are the interviewee. What kind of people are invited to what kind of podcasts, and what is it that they speak about? Do they justify a place like Gurgaon, that Gurgaon, every city should become like Gurgaon, should become a millennial city, or they say that Chandigarh is for the retirees? Do they speak positively or negatively about certain things, and how they are saying it? Are they saying it on the face, or are they saying it in a very subtle manner that you actually start believing in it, that yes, this person makes sense? Why is it that I am not thinking like that? And when it happens, then civil society becomes quite central to it, because it is the intellectuals who fulfill or fill civil society organizations, schools, universities, media. That is the reason why the media is many times managed, because anybody who is part of this historical block knows that if media is not managed, then their own rule will not get stabilized. Churches or religious institutions. So any country, any society you go to, you'll always find the religious institutions predominantly supporting the people or the historical bloc that are in power, or they would like them to come to power. Take the example of Iran, take the example of Saudi Arabia, take the example of Russia, take the example of Ukraine. You take any of these examples and it is very stark as to how they support, but they also support them irrespective of that. To the extent that many of the Nordic countries or even Scandinavian countries, their population are now predominantly atheists or non-religions, but they do celebrate Christmas every single year, which is a Christian festival. Now, this is how organic intellectuals create a hegemony through which what comes to our eyes and what comes to our mind, it is celebrated across the globe. In the case of India, for example, the population of Christians is not even 3%. But whenever there is Christmas, it is celebrated across the country. Because Christmas is now not a the Christian specific festival, but it is another festival. And out of it, the series of festivals that we Indians have, it is just another one. Let us also celebrate it. Now, this could be identified as part of secularism. This could also be identified as part of a culture in which, if you would like to identify yourself with a particular global north ideology, you have to follow it. Because what do you do on 25th of December? You celebrate Christmas. So that is how this entire gamut of aspects happen. But mind you, Antonio Gramsci is still imprisoned when he was writing this, and he was still a Marxist scholar. Although he is very important currently for us as a political sociologist, but he was also a Marxist scholar, and he was also a revolutionary for that matter. Because of his revolutionary ideas and ideology, he was imprisoned. So he argues that the intellectuals have two roles, because organic intellectuals are always linked to certain classes. They could be ruling classes or they could be classes of counter hegemony. We will come to it in a little while. So, another aspect that he speaks about is what he calls transformismo, and transformismo is the co-optation of opposition. Now, as I said here, organic intellectuals create an environment, right? They built in alliances with different sets of groups and different sets of people and different worldviews, so that their own worldview becomes a common sense. So, in transformismo, what is arguing is that this is the best way through which any mass movement can be neutralized, because what you are doing is that you are inducing the best intellectuals from the opposition camp, and by luring them, you are bringing them to your own camp, so that after a point they start speaking your language, and once they start speaking your language, then mass movements lose their temper, and once the mass movements lose their temper, then there is no question that the stability would ever be questioned. So, the reproduction of elites happens via culture and ideology, in which the organic intellectuals play a paramount role. Without that, neither the opposition nor the party in power can exist or reproduce themselves. To give it or to define it more, Gramsci gives the example of the Italian Risorgimento. Risorgimento basically means the reunification or unification of Italy. And it is a very fascinating history that it talks about. The fascinating history is that you have the party of moderates and the party of action. Now, if you look at this horseshoe type, the geographical map of Italy, this is the northern part where you have Rome and others, and this is the southern part where you have Sicily and predominantly agrarian area. And because this is predominantly agrarian, this area was predominantly industrial. The moderates came from this part. The party of action came from the southern part. So, here the party of action organized the peasantry to fight against the moderates from the north, so that the moderates do not create a hegemony over the entire landmass. But the moderates were quite smart. What they did, they co-opted most of the leadership of this Action Party. And once the leaders were co-opted, the peasants were excluded from there. And once the peasants were excluded from there, the entire movement collapsed. And if you go back to the history of Italy, these peasants who were excluded from this entire scheme of things later turned out to be the Italian mafioso. So it is a very interesting history that Italy has. But Gramsci is not going into that kind of history. What he is arguing about is that the exclusion of peasants or the subaltern masses and the creation of unified Italy. So there was no revolution as such, the way Marx and Marxists understood. Rather, it was a passive revolution from above. With passive revolution from above means the people who were powerful through sheer power and co-optation mechanisms, they control the entire area with no participation or less participation from people on the ground. So there was no national popular mobilization that happened in Italy for its reunification. But as I said, one group of people went on to become mafioso, but not everybody became part of mafioso. Rather, he is also talking about something called counter hegemony. Counter hegemony is the same but the mirror opposite of hegemony, or the hegemony that is created by the historical bloc. Because if you want to, if this is the historical bloc which is fighting for something, you have to create a counter historical bloc in order to fight against it. You manage your media, you bring intellectuals from the other side, you create your schools, you create your churches, so on and so forth. So it is both cultural and political through which everything is planned out. So the only way revolution can happen is through this counter hegemonic process. And it is also about war of position and war of maneuver. War of position basically means that you are using the institutions like, or civil society institutions like school, media, parties and churches to confirm, to bring the change of heart and change of mind of your opponents or greater mass of people, so that after a point in time they believe in your cause, and once they start believing in your cause, you can directly lead a war of maneuver and take control of the state power. And this happened in most of the places, including that of Russia, including that of India, including that of all over the world. A counter hegemony is always about war of position first and then war of maneuver. If it is not moving from war of position to war of maneuver, then the problem that will arise here is that the new group which is occupying the citadel are going to behave exactly like their previous owners. If dictatorship is replaced by another set of people, it will also be dictatorship. It will not be anything different. So what is the relevance of the Gramsci into political sociology? So like others that who we have been speaking about, he spoke power beyond the state in terms of society, he spoke about legitimacy, he spoke about consent, and he spoke about elite reproduction and social order. So Gramsci was not just, in conclusion, Gramsci was not just a Marxist scholar but also a political sociologist, and his idea of hegemony to bring together consent and coercion is still relevant. It is still relevant in the way we understand elite reproduction via the ideology and co-optation, and he was the first one to say that ideology is not and was never ever about the false consciousness, because war of maneuver is going to happen here. And unless and until ideology is conquered and our ideology becomes part of common sense, things are never going to improve and revolution will never happen. Thank you.